Welcome, beautiful people, to Camp Koji. My name is Joel. Thank you for joining me as I break down the biggest gaming news from the week that was on the only podcast you will ever need. On today's show, we're going to talk about the Palworld lawsuit update, Sony's lesson from Concord's failure, and finally, how would Trump's proposed China tariffs affect gaming? But first, let's go over some earnings, starting with Take-Two that had released some financials last week, and we got a few tidbits from that. Strauss-Zelnick claimed that he's not worried about the Xbox Series S performance for Grand Theft Auto 6, and at the same time, he reiterated that the game is still slated for fall 2025. Now, I think this was an answer to a specific question in terms of Xbox Series S and sort of everything that we know about supposed or proposed issues around Series S. And I think it's an interesting question to ask, but then I also look at it simultaneously as the issues behind Xbox Series S is one that we have consistently brought up in terms of just fans or people that talk about the industry, but it doesn't really seem like it's been as big of a problem as we think it is. Like sometimes you'll have a few developers talk about how it's harder to optimize, but there's not really many examples that we can think of games that seemingly just could not work on the Xbox Series S. You know, Baldur's Gate is probably like the biggest example of something like that happening. But it seems like across the board, companies have been able to figure it out. And I've brought this up before, where I think GTA 6 would be the first one that if for any reason Rockstar would say, hey, we can't get this thing running correctly, so you have to make a choice. You either let us release only on Xbox Series X or you won't have the game at launch. And I feel like that's one of those few games where Microsoft would absolutely have to, or Xbox would have to bend the knee and just say like, okay, I guess we're just going to, if you own a Series S, you're just going to have to wait. But it's good to hear that it's something I'm not worried about. When he was asked about Grand Theft Auto 6 and the fall 2025 release, he did say, quote, well, there is slippage in the industry and we're not immune from that. However, we narrowed the timing because we are highly confident in that timing. So sounds pretty good. Unfortunately, if I'm a betting man, I would never put money down on something like this, just because Rockstar has been known historically for delays, and they're not usually super accurate when it comes to hitting the date that they really set out. But hopefully everything goes right and they're able to release the game next year. Other news: Take-Two confirmed that they sold their indie label, which was called Private Division. They used to publish indie games. They also confirmed that Intercept Games and Roll7 were shut down. And they also said that both Borderlands 4 and Grand Theft Auto 6 are scheduled to release before March 2026. And they confirmed that the games will be released far apart from each other, which probably means that either Borderlands is going to be scheduled for like June, July of 2025, if they're able to get it done, or it's going to be early 2026 if we think about Grand Theft Auto 6 maybe making hopefully October, November of next year. They also confirmed that Red Dead Redemption series has topped 92 million units sold, and after 11 years, Grand Theft Auto 5 has sold 205 million copies. The GTA series has sold over 435 million copies in total, which, of course, if GTA 6 comes out next year, they'll easily cross 500 million copies. We also got some news from WB, Warner Brothers. They spoke about their financials and confirmed that they are focusing development efforts on 4 core franchises: Hogwarts Legacy, Mortal Kombat, Game of Thrones, and DC, in particular, Batman. And I think this is overall a great idea. I think Warner Brothers has been one of those companies that has been very, very profit driven, and IP right now is arguably at its most powerful, and they sort of saw the fruits of those labors when it came to Hogwarts Legacy, which was their high, and then of course they saw the low point, which was Suicide Squad. So they obviously have to find something in between for a lot of these franchises. I mean, I would think that NetherRealm is currently working on another Injustice. It just sounds like it makes sense, everything lining up in terms of how do they follow up Mortal Kombat 1. And then it becomes even more important when you remember that DC, the film universe right now is going through a bit of a reboot. It's really a perfect time to introduce a brand new Injustice. So I think that's something that could be happening. In terms of Game of Thrones for games, I mean, I don't know exactly how powerful that IP is right now. It's definitely not as popular as it used to be, but we'll see. Yeah, there's been rumors about Rocksteady going back into Batman, and as much of a Batman fan as I am, I think I still would rather see if they can finally pull off a Superman game. I still feel like a Superman game is something that everybody has been missing. Whether you're a comic book fan, whether you're a video game fan, as much as I love Batman, I really would love to see if they can execute a Superman game. Or if you go to Batman, I would love to see them tackle the Batman Beyond franchise and sort of move away from what they did with Arkham. Give us something new. WB also says that the Hogwarts Legacy sequel will share some big picture storytelling elements with HBO's upcoming Harry Potter series. And then Zaslav notably didn't include multiverses as one of these strong and profitable game franchises. Leon Nicole CFO Gunnar Wiedenfels blamed the fighting game for contributing to a further year-on-year hit of $100 million in the games department in quarter 3. And who could have predicted this? Me. That's who could have predicted this. I talked about when Multiverse is shut down. I said that they should have just left it shut down. I actually predicted that they were going to keep it shut down. I was wrong with that prediction, but I think the other half of that prediction was correct, where I called that game a failure the moment that I tried it. I said, this game is not going to last. It just lacks the quality needed in order to survive. And I think we're talking about player count that at one point was around 100,000 concurrent on Steam. It's, I think, struggling a bit to break 1,000 concurrent players, and that's only going to continue shrinking. And then, of course, that's sort of the catch-22 of doing something free to play. You make it completely free in order to get people in. But then as that audience starts to dwindle, your investment into the game does not it's not like you can turn that tap off, right? There's still so much R&D and all that money that's going into creating skins and new characters and all this stuff. There's apparently still like a huge list of characters that were, leaked and data mined that are probably still on the way. And unless they go ahead and just cancel it completely, then that game is probably at this point just bleeding money. Because they feel like they have to continue feeding it in order to get more people, but then you don't have the people to help you continue feeding in order for you to get more people. It's like a chicken and the egg situation. Monolith's Wonder Woman was not mentioned at all on the call, so who knows exactly what's happening with that video game. We haven't heard about it in a while. Our next story, we're going to talk about Palworld. So last week, Palworld developer Pocket Pair revealed further details regarding Nintendo's lawsuit. Quote, the plaintiffs claim that Palworld, released by us on January 19th, 2024, so this is an excerpt from a letter that they put out, infringes upon the following 3 patents held by the plaintiffs and are seeking an injunction against the game and compensation for a portion of the damages incurred between the date of registration of the patents and the date of filing of this lawsuit. The compensation they seek is payment of 5 million yen plus late payment damages each to the Pokemon Company and Nintendo Company Limited, which works out to around $32,800 US for each company. So this is an interesting update, something I think a lot of us were waiting for. That penalty obviously sounds really, really small, but the big thing that they're asking for is an injunction. And that could mean a lot of different things. It could be, Nintendo, Pokemon wanting sales of the game paused until they work out a deal for licensing whatever patent they are being accused of infringing. It could be, a pause in order for them to update the game and remove those features from the game, which, based upon what the patents are, I don't think would be realistic. We're going to go over what those might be. So obviously that's like the big thing that Nintendo is looking to get judged on their favor. Now, all three patents were strengthened after Palworld's release, but it looks like they were filed in Japan years ago. It looks like the filings happened in Japan around 2021. And earlier this year, they were, could be considered strengthened. One patent appears to clearly detail capturing monsters in a 3D space with a sphere. Another involves, I'm going to read it straight off of the patent, computing the motion of game characters with respect to other game characters, game objects, or elements of the game scene, simulating the behavior of a group of virtual soldiers, or for pathfinding. And the third is simulating properties, behavior, or motion of objects in the game world, e.g., or example given, computing tire load in a car race game using determination of contact between game characters or objects, example given to avoid collision between virtual racing cars. And I think this might probably allude to rideable creatures, I guess, is where they're being accused of infringing on that patent. So, I don't really have much more to add to this, or I think much more than when I previously spoke about this on the podcast. But this is one of those that I definitely cannot fathom anyone defending Nintendo doing this, because it's so immensely unhealthy for our industry for these companies to patent what are pretty simple mechanics, right? In order to not even expressly to prevent other companies from doing the same thing, but almost expressly, and I brought this analogy up the last time I talked about this, building a nuclear weapon and basically letting everybody know that you have this giant red button that you can press at any time if they decide to piss you off. And that's sort of how this entire thing feels. There's no part of this, to me, that feels like the Pokemon Company really feeling like their creation has been violated, that their copyrights are being violated, that they're being infringed upon. It feels very much like a vendetta. It feels very much like we're going to do this because we have the time, the money, and the resources to do this. And I brought this up before that I do truly believe that if these designs were not as close as they were to Pokemon designs, I don't think we'd actually be here. I think it was on IGN. They quoted, I think it was an analyst that claimed that this lawsuit proves that Pokemon Company is feels like Palworld is a force to be reckoned with, and that's not verbatim. I don't remember their exact words, but basically, like, this lawsuit is them sort of being scared of Palworld growing too big, and they want to nip this in the bud. And I'm here to tell you 100% that's false. That's not happening. There's not a universe where this game gets even close to the popularity of Pokemon. It's just not going to happen. But I still do believe that it really was the fact that the creature designs are close enough to what we're seeing in Pokemon, that I think that Pokemon especially, but also Pokemon and Nintendo, both look at this in a way of, I can't believe that you thought you could get away with this. I'm going to prove that you can't. And that's why they went ahead and did this. It really does feel like a personal vendetta, not really being done from the perspective of like, hey, we have to protect our copyright. I guess in the same way that you see Nintendo going after these, Switch emulator creators. That is, I feel like, an attempt to protection of your copyright, protection of your profits. This, like I said, feels like a much more like a vendetta that they're seeking against Palworld. And I still personally believe that they're still working behind the scenes to see if a copyright infringement lawsuit would be feasible, because I just don't think that this is enough. I don't foresee Palworld, if they lose this lawsuit, I do not foresee them, halting sales in order to change the game. If we're talking about rideable creatures, if we're talking about capturing monsters with a sphere and all that stuff, it sounds like a pretty complex thing to update, to remove and change in the game in order to comply or get away from infringing upon that patent. So if anything, they'll probably settle for damages, but obviously we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, this whole thing about I think they refer to it as patent trolling that Pokemon Company is doing. I just don't see how anyone could defend a company that does this. Is very anti design, right? We always talk about how Nintendo has some of the greatest designers across gaming. We always talk about that impact and what they were able to introduce to video games. Even something as simple as the D-pad. Like, imagine them patenting the D-pad, and no other controller could have a D-pad, or some of these other innovations that they did. It just isn't great for our industry. It really is anti-innovation. Our next story, I want to talk about PlayStation. So PlayStation also released some financials last week. They revealed that PlayStation 5 has sold 65 million units, which is phenomenal. At this point in its cycle, PlayStation 4 had sold 67.5 million units. So they're behind PlayStation 4 at the same time in its cycle by just 2.5 million units, which is pretty phenomenal for many reasons. The fact that, the cost of living has risen ever since PlayStation 4, right? We know how expensive everything is. The cost of the PlayStation 5 is higher than the PlayStation 4. Obviously, we have to talk about COVID and all the supply chain issues that they ran into. The fact that in a lot of countries, the cost of PlayStation 5 has actually risen. It's this late in the game, they haven't even thought about a price increase. A price cut. There's actually been a price increase and a new model that's being introduced that is more expensive than the current model. So you kind of look at all this, and it really is nothing short of impressive that they've been able to keep up so much. This also, I feel like, gives us a bit of a gauge as to where Xbox probably is, because I think PlayStation 5 has been able to healthily keep up that 2-to-1 advantage, which means that there's probably less than 35 or around 35 million Xboxes sold out there. But we won't have an official number unless Xbox reveals that. Sony's network services revenue, which encompasses PlayStation Plus and advertising revenue, increased 18% year on year, which Sony said was primarily due to the shift to higher tiers of service and price increases. They also revealed that Astro Bot sold 1.5 million copies within its first 2 months. They also revealed that 37% of those who purchased Astro Bot had not bought a first-party game in the last 2 years. And arguably, Astro Bot is probably like one of the more interesting first-party games that they released in the last 2 years. It's not like PlayStation has released much in the last 2 years, right? Their biggest releases really were Astro Bot and Spider-Man 2 probably were their biggest releases in the last 2 years. What they got, Lego coming out this month. A lot of PlayStation 5 within the last 2 years has kind of been driven primarily by third parties, especially when you look at their lineups this year. It's really, we're talking about Black Myth, we're talking about Silent Hill, we're talking about Stellar Blade. Those are really the games that people have been talking about this year. for a PlayStation 5. It hasn't really been much out of their first party. So that to me isn't like this really like huge, oh my God, 37%. This is their first game in 2 years. Like I said, there really hasn't been anything super major for PlayStation. Astrobot selling 1.5 million is not bad. I don't think it's super great, but it's also not bad, especially because you're thinking about how much it costs to actually make that game. 1.5 million is not too bad. I wonder how does this inform the future of Astrobot as a franchise? Because I think that when you think about Astrobot and it's selling 1.5 million, I think part of the appeal of Astrobot was the nostalgia and old PlayStation characters and stuff like that. And I kind of feel like you can't pull that trick again. I think if you did another Astrobot game, it would probably just be straight Astrobot. You wouldn't really rely on nostalgia or your old IP as crutches in order to help that it continue moving forward. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see what the next Astrobot is going to look like, or if they actually greenlight another Astrobot. And then COO and CFO Hiroki Totoki spoke about Concord's failure. He says, quote, and this was a rough translation, "Currently, we are still in the process of learning, and basically with regards to new IP, of course, you don't know the result until you actually try it. So for us, for our reflection, we probably need to have a lot of gates, including user testing or internal evaluation and the timing of such gates. And then we need to bring them forward, and we should have done those gates much earlier than we did." So the word gates here is kind of weird. I think it's something that's probably lost in the translation. But I think basically what he's trying to say is that we did not do proper testing for this game before we put it out, whether that was, as he says, internal evaluations or user testing, which I'm sure encompasses focus testing. And it really shows because I still maintain that Concord lived and died by those hero designs. And I think that that's a really, really good lesson for them to take away, is the importance of being able to focus test ideas and focus test those characters and see if you take them into a focus testing group, do they find those characters interesting? Do they find them cool? Are they gravitating towards those characters? Do they feel an inherent need to attach themselves to the intellectual property based on those characters? And I feel like that focus testing would fail miserably if they would have done something like that, or maybe when they did it, it was a little bit too late in the game. He also says, we have a siloed organization, so going beyond the boundaries of those organizations in terms of development and also sales, I think that could have been much smoother. This one's another kind of weird one that was probably lost a bit in translation. I don't know if that means like siloed organization, meaning that they weren't really sharing their game with other studios to gain feedback, but then I can't imagine that at the very least Bungie didn't provide any feedback for Concord. He also says, and then going forward in our own titles and in third-party titles, we do have many different windows, and we want to be able to select the right and optimal window so we can deploy them on our own platform without cannibalization, so that we can maximize our performance in terms of title launches. That's all I have. That was a little bit weird because there's something that PlayStation released that would have cannibalized this game. It's sort of released in similar window as Black Myth Wukong, but I don't know if I would have considered that cannibalization. I don't really think there would have been a perfect window for this game, kind of at all. I think the lesson that PlayStation needs to learn is definitely number one. You absolutely need to test these games. You need to do focus group testing very, very early on to make sure you're on the right track. And it's so much more important for a brand new intellectual property because, first impressions matter now more than they've ever mattered ever before in the history of our industry. Number two thing that I think that it needs to take away from this is I think they need to figure out how to introduce free to play into their games while simultaneously offering a sort of a bundle at the offset to encourage people to spend $40. I think this experiment that they've done with Helldivers 2 and now Concord, where it's supposed to be like, hey, you're paying full price for this, so you don't have to worry about microtransactions and battle passes and things like that. I think the average consumer has shown that they are okay with playing a game and having a company attempt to try to get them to spend money, as long as it means that they're able to play a really fun game free of charge. And if they really enjoy what they're seeing, then they're more than happy to open their wallets up. And Helldivers 2, I think, is very unique compared to what we saw from Concord, because it had a very, very unique hook, had a very, very unique premise, where that's a game that was not carried by Helldivers 1. I think if you polled the players of Helldivers 2 and asked them if they ever played the original, I think the majority of people would say no. They are drastically different games. Even when it was first announced, I was like, Helldivers 2, what was the first one at? I had to look it up. I didn't know what the hell the first Helldivers was. If you're not a PC gamer and into those types of games, you definitely would never have known that game even existed. But I think the reason why Helldivers 2 was so successful and PlayStation was able to move, I think it was over 12 million copies of that game, is because it had such a unique premise, and one that has not been overdone in our industry, focused very much on co-op. And I've said this plenty of times before, this is a genre of multiplayer games that I think way too many of these big companies are omitting and not paying attention to, where when you think about some of the biggest games out there, or biggest multiplayer that have kind of hit the zeitgeist within the last 12 to 24 months, a lot of them are about, playing with others, playing together, playing with friends. But a lot of them, there still is sort of a bit of a cooperative element to a lot of them. And I think that that's something for them to consider. This is the reason why I think that Fair Games is not going to do as bad as something like Concord, where I think Fair Games is a bit more of like a cooperative, competitive sort of experience. It's not just like a strict competitive game like we saw from Concord. There really aren't many games that are like that in terms of like a cooperative heist sort of video game like something like Fair Games. So I do think it will, fare a little bit better than we saw from Concord. But I think that one lesson that they need to take from Concord's failure is they do need a free-to-play path. That's very, very important, where I don't think the solution needs to be to make it completely free-to-play, but something where it's free to start. Either it's free, but you kind of go the multiverses route where you only have access to a few characters a week until you earn enough currency to unlock them just naturally playing, or you do something where if you're paying those $40, you get something in return. You get the first year of battle passes. So if you're releasing 4 battle passes and those battle passes will be $10 each, maybe you're doing 4 seasons a year. You tell someone, hey, you pay $40, you'll be able to get all 4 of those battle passes without having to pay them for them out of pocket. And then on top of that, maybe you get like extra skins or currency multipliers or something like that. In order to try to still get that revenue boost from the moment that the game comes out, but then you're sort of monetizing 2 ways. You're trying to get people in, very early and reward them with something that where them giving you $40 makes sense. But at the same time, you do have a free to play path, and you're still working on trying to convert those players into payers. And I think that's really the lesson that they have to take going forward. I mean, as I said before, I really don't foresee PlayStation stopping what they're doing. I do think that the future of the live service is still relying on new IP. I don't think that taking existing IP and sort of pigeonholing it into this different genre, I really don't think that's really the path to take for them. But we'll have to wait and see. But I still think that Fair Games will do better than that one we saw out of Concord. Now, for our final story, I wanted to briefly talk about a story that I saw from Gizmodo talking about the potential application of U.S.-Chinese tariffs. So if for whatever reason you were living under a rock, not too long ago, the United States of America had a presidential election, and the American people decided to give Donald Trump, aka the convicted felon, another 4 years, and let him sit down in that chair for a second presidential term. Now, before I talk about this, I just want to say two things. Number one, this is not, Camp Koji is not a political show. I'm not going to sit here and talk about politics and Donald Trump winning and whether he should have or should have not, or why did he, blah, 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 blah. This is not a show about politics. This is a gaming show. If you want that, there's plenty of resources out there if that's what you're interested in. And then number two, I do feel very compelled to preface this conversation by noting that I am talking about this because it is going to affect the gaming industry really kind of a lot. If this goes through, if this actually happens, this will definitely negatively affect our industry, like by a mile. And that's why I want to talk about this. But at the same time, in terms of the promises that Trump made for his second term, this really pales in comparison in terms of how serious this is compared to some of the other things that he's been talking about. So I just feel compelled to kind of preface that I feel like this is, just a reminder that gaming, especially when we're talking about this current state where the PlayStation 5 Pro is $700, this current state of, gaming is sort of a bit of a luxury. And I want to make sure that I point that out before we talk about this. But I think it's important to talk about because once again, this will definitely negatively affect our industry if it were to actually happen. So Donald Trump is currently on a path towards a second presidential term, and one of his campaign promises could raise the price of gaming across the board. So during his campaign, Donald Trump said he'd impose a baseline 60% tariff on Chinese exports. Laptop prices could spike by almost 50%. The cost of video game consoles could rise around 40%, making the upcoming PlayStation 5 Pro cost almost $1,000. A Consumer Technology Association study looked at 10 different consumer tech products: smartphones, laptops, connected devices, video game consoles, and various computer accessories. According to the study, a tariff on electronics from China would have the immediate effect of spiking prices and the long-term effect of driving manufacturing to other countries. Critically, though, those other countries would not be the United States. It's still too expensive to make stuff in America and keep costs down. A top-of-line GPU, the kind used for AI and gaming, could bloat from around $900 to $1,300. Price of monitors could go up to $109. Desktops would go up around $74 overall, and headphones could cost an extra $35. This whole tariff proposal thing has been kind of an interesting subject around this presidential campaign for the last few months, because Donald Trump basically lied to his base, and a lot of his base just sort of just believed him, did not do their own research to find out exactly what a tariff is. Donald Trump has trained his base to only listen to him and to look at the traditional media as the enemy. So it's no surprise that a lot of Trump supporters, especially like those diehard MAGA supporters, have been a bit taken aback and are actually surprised. Like I've seen so many clips, I think, across social media where Trump supporters are being asked about tariffs and they're being told what exactly tariffs are, and they're sort of baffled by it because they thought that a tariff imposed on China meant that China paid the tax. So they thought that that meant that when a PlayStation is assembled over in China, and China would be the one paying 60% extra in order to send it over to the United States. That's not how tariffs work. That's not how they've ever worked, which I think is really interesting because this isn't the first time Donald Trump talked about tariffs. He actually imposed tariffs while he was president during his first term. So it's just kind of weird how a lot of voters, I think, had absolutely no idea what a tariff was, and they genuinely did think that it meant that China would be paying more in order to send stuff and sell stuff here in the United States. But that's simply not how it works. That's never how tariffs have worked. But that's how Donald Trump sold it. So he would go on stage and he would talk about, we're going to impose tariffs on China. China's going to have to pay for this stuff. You're not going to have to pay anything. That was obviously bullshit. He just straight up lied, which is a surprise. I never knew Donald Trump was a liar. That's kind of a surprise to me. Wow, this guy actually lies. So, So the way it basically works is there's always this running joke for Americans where we always joke around that everything that we purchase here in America is made in China, and it's pretty close to the truth. A lot of items are either built and in China and land here complete, or a lot of parts and pieces come from China, and then the final assembly is done here in the United States of America. So theoretically, Trump supporters thought that meant like, hey, we would impose tariffs on China, which would encourage American companies to make things again in America. If only it was that simple, right? It's just not. Our economy has relied on China for a very, very long time. And when part of the backbone of your economy is the exploitation of really cheap labor in China, is just not, it definitely is easier said than done than to say, okay, you know what, we're just going to build it here. Especially, obviously, for something as complex as electronics. And video game consoles are like another step up from complex. Because, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, none of those things are built with like off-the-shelf parts. A lot of it is custom architecture, which is not something that all of a sudden you can just say, okay, I guess we're going to have to do this here in the United States of America. That's not how the world has ever worked. Free trade and trade has been such an integral part to pretty much humanity for as long as humans have walked the earth, even as early as thinking about the barter system. Trade has been very, very imperative. So this doesn't mean that all of a sudden, definitely for video game consoles, is impossible, right? That's just that's not a realistic scenario for Xbox and PlayStation to just say, okay, we're going to have to pay an extra 60% in order to, bring a PlayStation 6 over here to the United States of America. So we're just going to build it here in America. It's just not realistic. It's not like our country has all the parts available in order to actually build that. But even if we did have all the resources needed to build electronics, whether it's cell phones or laptops or monitors here in the United States of America, it would still be more expensive than building another country and shipping it here, simply because the exploitation of labor is, not as exploitative here in the United States of America as it is in other countries where the cost of labor is much, much cheaper than it is here in a country where we do have a minimum wage. Even if nationwide it's under $8. It's still more expensive than paying someone pennies to the dollar per hour in order for them to, for children to put together your iPhone, right? Now, here's something I think a lot of people might have forgotten, but back in 2019, there was supposed to be an imposed tariff on electronics, and that would affect the gaming industry. Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo got together and they wrote a joint letter to oppose the tariffs from the Trump administration. The proposed tariffs was at that point supposed to be 25%. And in that letter, they spoke about the massive economic impact gaming has on the United States of America. Obviously, we bring in a lot of money into the economy. They revealed that over 96% of video game consoles imported into the U.S. were made in China, which is pretty obviously significant. A tariff would cause a significant supply chain disruption that would increase the cost beyond the proposed tariff. And I think that's another thing that has to be talked about, which is there's no scenario right now if these tariffs happen, right? And you know, it kind of sounds like this is definitely Donald Trump's intent. That if this happens, there is just zero shot that the price of a lot of goods that come here into the United States of America will go up, but especially electronics. There's no scenario where it won't not only just go up, but go up above the price of the proposed tariff. Because once something like that happens, then it's like the immediate impact is that the prices are going to go up, right? Companies are not going to have a choice. In the immediate, the price is going to go up because companies are not going to just all of a sudden eat the cost and start selling stuff at a loss. So the immediate impact is the price goes up, but then the cost of fixing that supply chain is just so enormous. We're going to be so enormous for these companies because now they have to start looking into other countries, whether it's India or somewhere else, in order to build brand new supply chains. That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of money, a lot of resources. And another thing they brought up in that letter was that they spoke about the harm it could have on game developers and accessory developers. So this is something that won't just impact large businesses, and obviously for the purpose of this conversation that we're having, we're talking a lot about video game manufacturers and the cost of consoles, but then you also have to think about the development side, right? The cost of maintaining, the cost of building a studio now goes up kind of across the board, you know, because we build things on computers, right? The cost of so many things across the board will rise like crazy. And look, I'm one of those people that, I'll be honest, I just can't imagine this happening, right? I think it really is one of those where it's like, yeah, you have to prepare for it. Where I think that this year's Black Friday is probably going to be one of the biggest Black Fridays in U.S. history, because I think a lot of Americans are probably going to brace for this and say like, hey, if there's that television that I wanted to buy or that graphics card that I wanted to buy, if I have the money, I might as well buy it, towards the end of this month with Black Friday, just in case the price of the stuff actually goes up. I just find it very hard to believe that we have all these, gigantic tech companies that are now sort of smack dab in the middle of what they consider this AI revolution. And, there is this inherent need for electronic components that are built and supported by China, that they would just sit back and kind of do nothing. All these companies are probably going to do their very best to try to ensure that this doesn't affect their industries. And I could definitely see Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo once again joining forces in order to try to make that appeal over to the Trump administration. So for me, when it comes to the combination of these two major parts of Trump's proposed plan for his second administration, one is this, which are these proposed tariffs on China, which will not only just increase the price of almost everything across the board for us in the United States of America, but then you combine that with the fact that it will, without a doubt, probably start a brand new trade war with China, where China is going to start doing the same thing to American companies. And once again, I think I've seen like this very simplistic thinking from Trump supporters where they think that what this will do is it will encourage American companies to make things here in America. No, that's not going to happen. Small businesses are probably just going to shut down because they just won't be able to. The math is not going to math. Okay. On top of that, it's not like this is being combined with some sort of grandmaster tax cut plan. It's not like this is being combined with Trump and the Trump administration running on raising the minimum wage, right? So, this is pretty much negative across the board. There is literally no positive to this. This is why, leading up to this election, economists from across the world had all pretty much unanimously agreed that when it came to those two plans for these two presidential nominees, Harris and Trump, Trump would essentially destroy our economy compared to the plans that Harris was proposing. So you take the introduction of these tariffs and then you combine it with this conversation, this talk about mass deportation. And these are two things that it's like, it sounds really scary, but I'll be honest, this is a part of me that feels like it's too far-fetched to happen, especially when I think about something like tariffs, because tariffs there's an immediate effect, right? I mean, it's very, very immediate. And I think that the one thing I've noticed about, I'm not trying to say that Trump supporters are stupid. That's not what I'm trying to say. I think like the really hardcore MAGA people are very blinded by their loyalty to Trump. But I think that a lot of people will believe, hey, the economy is really bad, even though the economy is really great. Or, it's like they're going off of the feel of things. Like, oh man, eggs are definitely expensive now. And they don't do the proper work to find out why this is expensive, or the effect that COVID and supply chains had, or the fact that inflation rose for pretty much the entire world. It's not like this was like a U.S. Only kind of thing. And the fact that Biden did a really, really good job of taming that inflation and bringing it back to something that was a little bit more normal than when he first stepped into office, is that they'll look at this stuff and I feel like they won't, if it's an immediate effect, Trump and his administration are going to get that immediate feedback where, you have a lot of these supporters that keep talking about the price of gas, the price of groceries and all this stuff. If all of a sudden, by the end of January, PlayStation 5s are at $1,000 and, a TV that was $700 all of a sudden is $900. And the price of all this stuff just keeps going up and up and up. And once again, that's an effect that will happen across the board, and people are not able to keep their small businesses open. We're hearing these stories. It's a little bit hard to tell how true they are. There was this one story apparently of a company that told their employees that they will not be receiving Christmas bonuses because the company now has to invest into buying raw materials now and ordering it from China in order to prepare and store it for hopefully at least year one of these tariffs taking place, so they won't be as hard hit. And there are a lot of companies right now that are internally apparently preparing for this and telling themselves, like, what can we do now in order to ensure that we get, that we're able to buy it at today's price and not wait until everything goes up a little bit later. But when I think about the tariffs, once again, that is an immediate impact on the American family, something that they will immediately start to feel. And that's not even thinking about all these different industries, especially if you talk about a flat tariff across on China, whether it's the automotive industry, whether it's construction, and the fact that a lot of steel is imported in from China. It really can have an enormous across the board effect. And that's why, to me, it still feels very implausible that this will actually happen. I'm definitely not going to sit here and say it's impossible. But even the other aspect of this thing with Trump, which is mass deportation, that is another thing that would really sink our economy, because the American economy is so built on things made in China and cheap labor here in the United States of America, which are a lot of undocumented migrants, especially when you think about the food supply here in America, it would collapse, right? Americans trust that. I mean, people have been saying this for a while, and sometimes they say it jokingly, but in all honesty, as a fellow Latino, I'm going to tell you right now, Americans are not going to be going out into the fields and doing those jobs. Those jobs fucking suck, and they're very, very, very hard. Okay, it's not something where if mass deportations happen and it affects employment in our food supply, whether it's agriculture or meat packing, whatever it may be, these companies are not going to be able to replace that labor very easily by just kind of putting that out there to fellow Americans. They're not going to keep or want to do those jobs unless they're getting paid a lot of money. You're going to have to pay them a lot more. So, I wanted to bring this up because it is something, I guess, to keep an eye on. As I said, I still think that this is such a preposterous ask that I genuinely don't see it happening, because it would have, once again, such an immediate, such a recognizable impact on our industry, as opposed to a bajillion things that your government does that you probably never even notice on the back end. And I just personally don't foresee it happening. It really reminds me of when Trump first campaigned, and one of his biggest bullet points was, we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. Trump isn't stupid. There's a lot of things that you can call Trump. There are a lot of insults you can lobby at this guy. Stupid and dumb is not one of them, right? Trump is not a dumb person. I think there's enough proof out there that this man is, in order to be as emotionally manipulative as he's been able to be, you have to have some sort of level of pretty solid intelligence in order to do something like that and accomplish something like that. Trump's not an idiot. So when Trump first ran it, he said, we're going to build the wall. Mexico is going to pay for it. Trump knew Mexico wasn't paying for that shit. like he's not stupid. But the thing about it is that he knows that will energize his base, because a lot of these things are fear driven. And he was right. It energized that base to go out and vote for him, because he created this problem that was much bigger coming out of his mouth than it was in reality, which is migrants are pouring over into our country, which is just not true. It's 1,000% not true. This guy was painting these pictures like it was World War Z of people jumping over walls and stuff like that. He knew Mexico wouldn't pay for it. And that's sort of how I feel about this tariff thing. Is like, he said it because it sounds good. It's very simple, very succinct, right? Tariffs, China's going to suffer 60%. It's going to be beautiful. It's the same thing as build the wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. You guys don't have to worry about it. And those two things, I think, parallel each other in my mind, where I feel like Donald Trump knew it was stupid. I think he knew that people were stupid enough to just believe him when he said it, because it sounds good, right? It's a good story for the very daft that don't take the 2 minutes to pull this incredible magical device out of your pocket in order to search up what a tariff is, so you can quickly find out that that's definitely not how tariffs work. But to him, he knew, it'll energize my base. But I feel like that's my hope is that he's looking at this the same thing as Mexico is going to build a wall, where it's like, it's just some shit I said, but that's not really realistic. I'm not really going to do that, even if he keeps saying he's going to do it, because the election just finished. But so something to keep an eye on. If there's any updates, I'll bring it up on the show. But yeah, keep your ear on that. This week's hot releases, November 12th, we have Farming Simulator 25, PC, PS5, Xbox Series X. We also have The Rise of the Golden Idol. This is coming to all platforms, including mobile platforms, Android and iOS. If you are a Netflix subscriber, it is also going to be added to the Netflix games catalog if you want to access it through there. On November 14th, we have Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake, PC, PS5, Switch, Xbox Series X. And finally, we have Skydance's Behemoth coming to PC, PSVR 2, and MetaQuest. Time for us to wrap it up. These are the stories that we didn't have time to get to. Shortly after Netflix shut down one of their gaming studios before it shipped a game, their VP of Gen AI for games, Mike Verdu, made a LinkedIn post praising generative AI's future for Netflix games. What's happening right now with generative AI, especially when we're talking about the gaming industry, it really it gives me those NFT deja vus where you had these companies that kept talking about how NFTs were the future, blockchain was the future, and we all realized that it was just really a shareholder buzzword. That's what this is. I think it's really just shareholder bullshit in order to make your shareholders feel like, oh my God, we're going to be able to make games faster, quicker with less people. No, that's not going to happen. Anyone that tries to sell you this dream that AI is going to get to a point where you type in the type of game that you want and it'll just create it, it's complete bullshit. This is completely different than people who talk about, oh, people are going to be able to make an entire film using AI. Yeah, it's just nowhere near the same. Games are way more complex than just typing in a little prompt. It's definitely not as easy as using generative AI for art. This is bullshit. I've said this before that I still don't understand why Netflix thought games were a good idea. It only benefits people who are already gamers that own Netflix, right? There's no one that's going to sign up for Netflix just to play these games or the people who primarily subscribe to Netflix. I guarantee they don't even know that games exist on the service, especially because they're primarily really driven through the mobile platforms, right? Jason Keegan, a guy who taunted Nintendo about streaming pirated Switch games, now faces a $7.5 million lawsuit that accuses him of streaming leaked Switch games, including this month's Mario & Luigi Brothership, ahead of release using emulation software as many as 50 times in the last 2 years. Nintendo is seeking $150,000 in damages for each instance of alleged copyright infringement. So this is definitely FAFO, as they call it. Fuck around and find out. This guy was basically goading Nintendo into suing him. He basically thought he was really high and mighty. He was above it all. And Nintendo, if there's one thing that Nintendo will never shy away from, is making an example out of someone. And this is definitely one of those moments in time where they say, trust me, I have the time, I have the money, and I have the resources to put a small law team together purely just to make an example out of you. I don't even need the money. I don't even want the money. There's no way you have the money. There's no way you're going to be able to pay this. It doesn't matter. By doing this, if I can prevent other people from doing the same thing, whether it's streaming or even making tutorials on how to pirate and stuff like that, I'm going to do this 10 times out of 10. Nintendo President Shuntaro Furukawa confirmed that Nintendo Switch's successor will be backwards compatible. So this is the first instance of official confirmation. He did confirm last year that Switch Online will move over onto Nintendo Switch, but this is the first time that he has acknowledged that the console will be backwards compatible. Now, one thing that people have noted is that he did not specify whether it will be physical and digital, or or digital games will be backwards compatible. The fact that he did not expressly say digital backwards compatible, to me, means that there will be a physical slot for Nintendo Switch games. I don't think that the president would come out and say this unless it was fully backwards compatible. So I don't think that's something to worry about. As I said, like a bajillion times on this podcast, I still think that it's a new Nintendo Switch sort of thing. But we'll have to wait and see. I definitely don't think we'll have an announcement this year. I don't know why anyone thought we would. It doesn't make any sense. See you early next year. I could definitely see something happening in January. Death Stranding Director's Cut surprise released on Xbox last week on the game's 5th anniversary. Kojima Productions also announced that the game has sold 19 million copies and they now own full rights to the intellectual property. So a lot of good news coming out for Death Stranding last week. Death Stranding is definitely, I don't know where it falls on the list, but it's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. I just love that game. I've played through it twice. I definitely will be going through a third run through before the sequel comes out. And I'm very, very happy to see it on more platforms. It is also now available to stream on Amazon Luna if you have that service. But it's cool to see it coming out on Xbox. They actually coupled that with a special deal where it's 50% off on Xbox. I think you can get it for like $20, which is phenomenal. It's also 50% off on iOS and Mac devices. And I think the PC version, which is kind of cool because if you get the Windows PC version, it is Play Anywhere. So you also get the Xbox version, which is pretty cool. I love this game. I think a lot of people missed out on it. So I'm actually surprised I saw 19 million. I actually didn't think the number would be that high. But I'm happy to see more and more people are going to be able to play this. So a lot of people have been thinking, I saw some people online saying like, oh, maybe this means that Death Stranding 2 will launch on Xbox. No, absolutely not. There's no way that PlayStation would have let that happen. I personally think that what happened here was when PlayStation negotiated with Kojima for his next game, which is Fizzant. My theory is that Death Stranding was part of the deal, where Kojima said, "Hey, I have this idea for another game. I want to make a movie to go along with it, something live action." That aligns with PlayStation's current trajectory, so that partnership makes sense. But I do feel like that was part of the negotiation where Kojima said, I would like to make this a PlayStation exclusive, but as part of that, I want the opportunity to buy Death Stranding back. And I think they made a deal to work that out, which is great for Kojima because now, he's working with A24 to do something Death Stranding live action. But I don't think that this means that it will be coming to Xbox at launch. I think that the window will definitely shrink. It probably won't take 5 years for Xbox and PC users to play Death Stranding 2. I could see him going back to 505 Games to publish again and then simultaneously releasing on PC and Xbox. But I think it would probably be a minimum 2 years from the PlayStation launch. But hopefully shorter, more people that can play this game, the better. Shout outs go out to Mr. Tony Todd, the legendary actor who recently voiced Venom in Spider-Man 2, unfortunately passed away last week. He will be next seen in Indiana Jones and The Great Circle, which comes out very, very soon. So may the legend rest in peace. Make sure to subscribe to Camp Koji on your favorite podcast platforms so you can listen to it on the go. And if you already are, please leave us a review. It helps out more than you know it. Thank you so much for joining me. Once again, I'm Joel, and I will see you all next week.